Hello and welcome to my next video. In my last video, I talked about the mechanism of projection and how that leads to much of our suffering in life. The reason being because we project onto the world our own conditioning and subconscious belief systems and then perceive those projections. At the end of the video, I said that in order to sort of combat or negate the negative effects of projection, we need to learn to observe our projections, observe our emotions, our thoughts, our feelings, our images that arise in the mind. And instead of reacting to our projections, we learn to forgive ourselves and other people. So if you remember in the last video, this was how projection works. What we think we see isn't actually there. There's a filter of our beliefs and conditioning, our subconscious programs that is filtered onto the world, so that when we perceive the movie of reality or the film of reality, there is a tint to it, a coloration that is determined by our beliefs, conditions, and programs. That creates a feedback loop of confirmation bias where we see the world the way we think, and then we confirm to ourselves that the way we think is correct. In order to break this cycle, we need to forgive. Now, how do we forgive? Forgiveness essentially starts with the decision to forgive. The willingness to forgive is the most important component of forgiveness itself. It's also crucial to understand projection and to recognize the pain that anger, attack, and guilt cause internally. The reason that forgiveness works at all, and in all cases, is because it rests on the truth of our universal commonality. If you can't see that, then you're projecting. An example of this mentality would be saying something like, "They are nothing like me," or "I'm nothing like them. They're awful, and I would never do things that they've done." When you're operating from this position, there will never be a time when you think forgiveness is appropriate. There's nothing that I could say or anybody else could say that would convince you that forgiveness will actually bring you inner peace. The only thing that you can fall back on is that you and the other person, who may or may not be an abuser, who may have done something awful to you, shares the same fundamental being that you do. So let's dive a little bit more deeper into the why and how of forgiveness. Let's start with Steve. Steve, in an ideal world, should feel lighthearted, but instead, his heart is clouded by guilt. We have these clouds of guilt that are covering up the brightness and the love of his internal essence, his heart. And we know what it's like to feel heavy-hearted. That's why we have this sort of saying in our culture. He should be lighthearted, not heavy-hearted. He shouldn't feel like his heart is clouded by guilt. And depending on his temperament and the severity of this guilt creates anger, it creates grief, it creates apathy, and all of these things combine to create the clouds that cover the potential of our heart and its lightness, or you could say the light within us. Because these feelings of anger, grief, apathy, guilt are so uncomfortable in their raw forms, they are held out of our conscious awareness through repression and suppression. So Steve might be walking around day to day, and he doesn't necessarily recognize that he has a heavy heart. Maybe if he spends some time alone, he doesn't watch the TV right away when he gets home or turn on YouTube or Netflix, then he might notice that he's not very happy. Maybe he distracts himself. That is actually a form of this suppression. And repression is the automatic mechanism that pushes these uncomfortable emotions out of your conscious awareness. So, in short, repression is automatic. You don't have to think about it. Suppression, on the other hand, is deliberate and is a conscious choice, such as, like I said, eating, watching TV, basically trying to avoid the uncomfortable feelings. So, he could be walking around with this heavy heart, but he doesn't necessarily realize it because these emotions are repressed and he's actively suppressing them when they do come up. Projection, as we've described, is also automatic. It is a psychological defense mechanism and is a form of repression. So this is basically what's happening for us all. And what we have here is a personal conscious mind. So Steve has a personal conscious mind, and he also has a personal subconscious mind. As I said, those raw emotions are so uncomfortable that as they build up, they get pushed out of Steve's conscious awareness into his subconscious mind. But the mind wants to heal. It wants to purge the repressed emotional energies. So I call these emotional energies. And they come up through thoughts, images, and feelings, which are colored by the emotional energies, and they're served to the conscious mind. So these emotional energies down here lie in wait beneath our conscious awareness, and then they're served up to our conscious mind in the form of images, thoughts, and feelings, and they usually have some sort of tint to them, or they're colored by the emotion that's behind that form, that thought form. However, that's not the only way that these emotional energies are able to surface. So this would be like if you're by yourself in your room at night before going to bed, you might have these things arise. Maybe you're going about your day, brushing your teeth, but there's other things that happen. There's an outside world, and its events will trigger you. When you are triggered, you will behave and think in a way that will protect the ego. This is where projection swoops in to save the ego. So when you're triggered, if you're triggered, lightly or strongly, it doesn't necessarily matter. You will behave in accordance with that trigger and using projection to protect the ego. You will engage in automatic projection or other forms of suppression or repression in order to prevent yourself from being overwhelmed by these uncomfortable raw emotions. So let's just describe the projection cycle in more detail from last video. Here, Steve is safe and sound. He's comfortable, he's going about his day, but then a trigger happens in his outside environment. This means that energy will arise. So he's being triggered by this girl, we'll name her Sally. So Steve is triggered by Sally, and then to repress it, he engages in projection. And this happens automatically. There's no time in between that is perceptible. It just happens. And the goal is to observe our projections. So as we're projecting, we enter a state of anger and we begin to attack that which triggered us. So Steve starts to attack Sally, saying, "They're wrong, not me." Then, after this whole thing is dealt with from Steve's perspective, guilt and fear arises. Whether or not you're aware of it, it does arise. Guilt arises because there's a sense of wrongdoing. So Steve will feel guilty for having attacked Sally. There's also fear because we harbor a subtle fear of retaliation. Steve has just attacked Sally, so now he's subconsciously afraid that now he will be the object of attack, either from Sally or somebody else. It's a subtle subconscious thing that's going on, and you won't necessarily be aware that you're afraid of retaliation in the world unless you become mindful and meditate on your subconscious energies. Then once this is finished, repression is now complete, and he's back to being safe and sound. And this cycle will continue over and over and over in our daily lives. And it's not going to be Sally every single time. It could be something as simple as, your cat walks underneath your feet and it triggers anger. Or someone cuts you off in traffic. Or the bus comes 5 minutes late. They can be as simple or as complex as they seem to be in the moment, but they all follow a similar pattern. So how do we stop this cycle? How do we stop this cycle of projection, or at least its negative effects? What we do is, as you said before, we forgive. We break the cycle with forgiveness. But how do we forgive? And that's the aim of this video. Many people are unclear on how to forgive. Well, the first thing we need to do is decide to forgive. We need to make the decision that we want to forgive. We decide to give up justifying our resentments and give just a little willingness to forgive. That's all we need, is a little bit of willingness. It doesn't need to be a whole lot. You don't need to throw yourself into it wholeheartedly right away. Just decide a little bit. Give a little willingness towards forgiveness, and that will be the biggest catalyst for change. We let go of everything we are using to justify the resentment or the story, and the forgiveness will happen. As soon as we decide to let go. We let go of the resentment. We let go of the story around the person, place, thing, event that we're having trouble forgiving. But how do we let go? Simply observe what comes up for you rather than reacting to it. You might say, but I can't. I can't do that. It's impossible. I can't. I can't, in terms of projection and forgiveness, really just means I won't. There are no exceptions to this. If you're saying you can't forgive, what you're really telling me is that you won't forgive. And I have a little analogy here for you. Here's Steve, and he's holding a pencil. If I asked Steve, just let the pencil go, he would be able to technically let it go and have it drop to the ground. There's no difficulty in him just unclenching his hand and dropping the pencil. It's the same thing with any resentment we might have, or grudge, or tricky emotion. It's just a pencil, and you're just gripping it really, really, really tight. You just have to let it go. It's that simple. You observe what comes up for you. You don't label it, you don't judge it, and you don't react to it. You let it go. You let the pencil go. No exceptions. All right, so here we're going to get into an example, because I know that there's going to be people in the comments, because there were in the projection video, telling me that there are abusers and they don't deserve your forgiveness, they deserve hatred. Hatred is actually what gives you peace. There were many, many different types of comments, but they all basically amounted to a disbelief in the practice of forgiveness and whether or not it is actually effective. Now, let me reiterate what I said in the other video. Forgiveness does not mean that you condone behavior. It doesn't mean that you think it's perfectly okay. If someone murders somebody else, forgiving them doesn't mean that you think murder is good or that it's okay. Forgiveness does not mean you condone the behavior. Now that we have that entirely squared away, we can continue with this example. Let's say that Steve used to be dating Sally, and, well, she's fallen in love with Bill. So this trigger is the trigger of betrayal. Steve, of course, is not going to be able to forgive right away. So why would he decide to? Why would he decide to forgive? This is absolutely devastating for Steve. He's just lost his girlfriend to some other person because she fell in love with somebody else. This feels like an absolute betrayal of trust, and he's probably sick to his stomach. It probably keeps him up at night. All these sorts of things about his self-worth, what their relationship meant to her. You know, even the way in which this could have happened is going to create a lot of turmoil, whether it was, a sit down, as mature conversation as it gets, or it was dragged out, maybe there was cheating. Anywhere on that spectrum, he's going to feel betrayed. There's going to be pain, and that's going to breed resentment, which is going to create repressed anger and grief, along with many other emotions that come out of this experience. That's reason number one. The reason we forgive is because we want to undo the grief, anger, resentment, and eventually heal the pain. So we're working backwards. Reason number 2 is, like I said earlier in the video, Steve and his ex are fundamentally the same. The only differences are programs and conditioning. They are fundamentally the same. The only difference are their programs and conditioning from birth. So that's reason number 2. We're going to heal this pain for Steve. We're going to discover an inner peace. And we're also going to recognize the truth that there is no real difference between Steve and Sally. Now, once Steve has decided to forgive, he just has to remind himself of that decision each time the memory and the emotional energies are triggered. So each time that there is a trigger, he's going to remind himself that he's decided to forgive. This could be a memory, this could be he's seeing something, an object or a place that reminds him of the relationship. He's going to decide again that he's going to forgive. He needs to remind himself that he's decided to forgive. And he's decided to forgive to heal. He's decided to forgive to gain peace. Let's look at what's happening more closely with Steve here. As I said, there's a personal conscious mind and a personal subconscious mind for Steve. He has emotional energies below his conscious awareness, and he'll have perhaps an image come to mind. Maybe the relationship's long gone, it's been years, but sometimes still an image of the relationship, of something in the relationship, an image of the actual breakup, an image of the betrayal, something that represents it comes to mind, and he feels beneath that image, beneath that thought form, is the emotional energy. So here it is, maybe he's remembering the breakup, he's remembering the pain, that pain is coming up with the image, it's emotional energy, it represents that subconscious reservoir of energy. What he's going to do is observe it. He's going to breathe, relax, and observe. He's going to decide again, I forgive you. He might actually say this, and I recommend it. Say out loud, I forgive you. And say it towards the person, the event, whatever it is that's causing you pain. Another way of looking at it is emotional energies that come up from the subconscious mind along with images, thoughts, and feelings. So the feelings speak for themselves, of course. There will be an energy with thoughts and images, and the feelings will just represent a much greater reservoir beneath the subconscious mind. Don't pick up what is being served. What I say when this happens is hands off. And I have this little image here of Steve's hands. And what he's doing here is just keeping his hands off the image. He's not going to grab hold of this. He's going to observe it. He's doing this, It's kind of like dropping the pencil. He's dropped the pencil. Let's say the pencil has arisen out of the subconscious mind. It's now in his conscious awareness. He's not going to touch it. Don't touch the pencil. Hold your hands out in a figurative manner. Do not pick it up. Just observe. Allow what arises without labeling it or judging it. Simply observe as dispassionately as you can. And I go into this on my video about letting go. The reason you're going to observe it as dispassionately as you can is because the subconscious mind is attempting to heal the pain. Your mind wants to heal. The way it heals is by releasing, learning from, and integrating these experiences. If you keep your hands off, if you breathe, relax, and observe, this reservoir of emotional energy will eventually exhaust itself. You might experience bodily sensations. You might experience further thoughts and images. You might experience more intense emotional energies. You might experience repressed memories. The entire time that this happens, you will continue to observe. You will continue to attempt to relax and observe and just keep saying, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you. Do not pick it up. Keep your hands off. Another analogy that I've come up with, which I really like, it really helped me a lot in hard times, is let's say, hypothetically, metaphorically, you're sitting by a nice warm fire in your cabin and you're observing the fire, We love looking at fires. They're so beautiful, entrancing, hypnotic, and you're just enjoying your own company and the company of this warm fire. Now suddenly, in here comes an image with that emotional energy. Here comes that image. Sort of just knocks on the door and then, without waiting for a reply, walks on in. What you're going to do is gently turn to that image, that thought form, and say, welcome. Please enjoy the fire with me. You don't have to invite it next to you. You don't have to hold its hand. You don't need to get it a cup of tea. All you need to do is be okay with its presence. But the more you invite it in, say you do get it a cup of tea, or you do invite it to sit down next to you, it essentially represents allowing the energy to flow more freely and to allow the experience to affect you more deeply, but in a dispassionate way, to allow the reservoir to empty itself, in a sense, faster. And faster just means less resistance. So the less you resist the company of this image and these emotional energies, the quicker they will dissipate. And if you need something to focus on your inner flame, your inner light, your inner peace. It's always there. This represents your inner peace. This represents your inner light, your inner spark, your inner sense of being. If you focus on that and allow these things to arise, turn to them, note them, allow them to be there. Don't push them away. Don't reject them. Don't label them. Don't judge them. Just allow them. They're a part of you and they want to be healed. Your past self, Steve's past self, wants to heal. But during that time, it was far too difficult for him to handle the emotional heartbreak. It was so difficult for him in the moment to experience that betrayal. So he had to repress it. He had to protect his psyche. So it went down beneath his subconscious awareness, beneath his conscious awareness, and it became trapped in the subconscious. But later, as he's going about his day, years later, weeks later, now there's an opportunity for him to heal. So these things will arise, and they just want you to recognize them and let them be and let them go. And you're going to see things, you're going to feel things, you might get repressed memories, you're going to learn a lot about yourself. Steve will learn a lot about himself, but that's a good thing. And the healing is a good thing. Try not to resist the natural inclination of your mind to heal itself. So this last one, I just want to give a little bonus slide here. Basically, some other things that might help you with the step-by-step mechanics. As I've already sort of said before, there's no real separation. I said this in one of my other videos. There is no real separation between Steve and Sally, between Steve, Sally, and Bill. They're all within one awareness. They're all within one conscious awareness. There is a great one consciousness that all forms arise out of, and because you all arise from the same consciousness, there's no real separation. The other thing that might help is that there's no fundamental difference. Steve, Sally, and Bill were all once little goo-goo gagas, little babies, and they had no programming whatsoever. And actually, Sally wouldn't even have the concept of being in love with somebody else. They're just two babies. If you can remember that Sally was just a little baby like he was, and due to her programming, her conditioning, maybe, unfortunately, as awful as it feels, as awful as it is, she cheated on him. And that's a terrible thing to happen. And that's going to hurt a lot. But if he was in the same position, if he had the same life, the same conditioning, if he was the exact same person, he would necessarily do the exact same thing. So he has to have compassion for the fact that there's no fundamental difference, and that all of her life experiences and her conditioning led to this. The other thing that you can do, especially if you're already a spiritual person and you're okay with it, you already believe in a higher power, is ask for help. You can ask for help with forgiveness. You don't have to do it alone. And in fact, I don't suggest you do it alone. But I want to make these videos so that anybody can practice these techniques and gain more peace in their life. You don't have to. If you want to try it, or if you already know that it works, that's wonderful. Ask for help. And I just kind of drew this biblically accurate angel, for a joke. But, ask for help from anybody, from a guide, a spirit guide, a spirit friend, a guardian angel, an archangel, even just like somebody who's passed away that you used to know. You can ask from any deity that you believe in. You can ask from just God or intelligence or your higher self. It doesn't matter. If you ask for help, if you have made the decision, have any form of willingness to forgive, and ask for assistance, you will receive it. You can even just see it as you're asking your subconscious mind to cooperate more with you through the process of letting go. Your ego's will, your small will be difficult. And it may be hard, depending on the severity of what you're dealing with, to commit fully to the decision to forgive. There will be obstacles. There will be challenges. But if you ask for help, it lightens the load. And this is something that if you're willing to, you can try it and you'll see the difference. This has worked for me. I have experienced this in my life. I have experienced a lot of hardship in my life, many worse things than this. And I have been able to observe, I've been able to put into practice forgiveness, and I've been able to heal. I would not be advocating this if it didn't work. So please give it a shot. For those few people who are going to go to the comment section and tell me, how could you forgive this or that, with all these different types of examples of seemingly more severe cases, instead of allowing that pain to run you, take a deep breath, relax, and just observe it. And try to forgive. Just give it a shot. See how you feel. That energy might be intense, but try and just allow it in. Observe. Keep your hands off of it. Just give it a shot. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.